Okay, Paul. Today's quick fix is motivation. How do you define it?
Hello, Matt. Hello, everybody. Yeah, we think of motivation as the ability to sustain meaningful effort, even when the conditions around you are changing. So you know how, like last week, we were talking about balance, weren't we? And I and we discussed there about this idea of like sustaining energy for the different parts of your life. Well, you can have energy. You can have energy in terms of like, you're not falling asleep on the couch. But are you able to direct that energy into some form of meaningful effort? As I say, even as those conditions are changing.
I was kind of think of motivation around like feeling inspired, motivated, inspired to do something. Like you have to be moved.
Yeah, it's a component, and it's often misunderstood. There is a lot of research that has been done into motivation. I would say really over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, and before it was like very very closely linked to the positive psychology movement, etc. It was like you had to rah-rah people and cheer people up and all that kind of stuff. And then people started looking at situations where people were incredibly, unbelievably motivated. And it wasn't always, things are amazing and it's amazing to be part of this amazing thing. I mean, think about Churchill in the Second World War, right? Churchill had an extraordinary ability to motivate people, but often he was motivating people through pretty accurate descriptions of really really dark times, and that ended up being a powerful motivator for people. And you see it actually even online now, right? You see people that are motivated in very positive ways, but people are also kind of motivated by pretty negative ways, right?
Yeah.
In pretty negative ways, like the country's going to hell and my place in it is blah blah blah, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that first thing is it's not all centered around inspiring and positivity, but
Right.
also it's not. While that is a component to it, there's also a bunch of it that is actually just really centered around knowing the reality, knowing what matters to you, why it matters to you, and how you're going to make meaningful progress. And so the leader that stands up in front of a bunch of people uses very animated, excited tones and uses the classic phrase that I heard a million times when I worked at Microsoft: I'm super excited by this, or I'm super excited by that. I'm sure soon to be replaced by mega excited by this and mega excited by that. They're not actually accomplishing what is really necessary. What they're doing is they're acting as a hype machine, but that is very different to actually somebody that is inspiring motivation.
Yeah, that's a good distinction because I guess, if you get inspired by a great talk at one of those keynotes or something or at a product launch, how long till that wears off and you now have to do the work that was laid out, right? So,
Yeah,
you have
and the
to
answer is
sustain
not.
it.
Yeah, the answer is not very long at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, and by the way, if you fix that by just simply showing up again and again and again and again, then the effect wears off, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's almost like a drug, right? You give people the initial hit of the drug, and then the next hit doesn't work as well, and the next hit doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
So it does. It's much more. It's much more nuanced, I suppose, and it's related to what people do, and it does ebb and flow significantly.
And so, what do you think's making motivation difficult now?
Well, I think that the one thing is the lack of clarity. We have moved from a world where our jobs were very tightly defined, and they were tightly linked to extrinsic motivators. We'll probably get into the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic a little bit in a moment here. But it was work this number of hours. Let's say there's a number of errors that you that might happen as a result of your work. Like minimize that number of errors. Work for this number of hours. You'll get this reward. Work a few more. You'll get some overtime. That sort of stuff. And so it was like, do this, get this. Do this, get this. And that allowed people to tie the hard work they were doing to a specific reward. And much of that has gone, and the majority of people, I know I mentioned this on the podcast before, majority of people lack clarity as to what they're doing and how that contributes to something that is bigger. And many people on a day-to-day basis don't even remember what they have done on a day-to-day basis. So how can you be, collectively inspired to do that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, mindset plays a role here.
Yeah, I would, but not in, as we discussed, right? Not in this sort of like just think positive thoughts thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so where motivation improves is actually kind of in two ways. So one is when you have the mindset that you believe that progress is something that you can generate, right? So that you can actually create progress. So what that implies is that you're looking for things as you do your daily work to materially move yourself forward. And then the momentum of the work that you're doing is in itself acting as some form of motivator, which is why a lot of people talk about, understanding what that first step is. I've got this thing that I want to accomplish in the future. Yeah. What's the thing I'm going to do right now that is going to advance me to that? And then keep repeating that process and generating some momentum associated with that. And the second thing... go ahead.
Well, just that it's important that you can generate it.
Yes.
Like
yes,
you can
generate.
You're the source of that generation, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, the second thing, which is at least as important, and this is very important as to how people think about their motivation. A lot of the way we classically train to think about it is, just buckle down, do the hard work, and so on. And yes, that can play a part. But what we found is that people that sustain the best motivation over time are what I would almost refer to as like momentum surfers. So their motivation is higher generally, but they know that their motivation dips and rises. It ebbs and flows. So they're basically, when they're at a point in the week or a point in the month where the motivation is strong, they're maximizing that.
Yeah.
When motivation is weaker, they're accepting it and they're writing it out. So they're not trying to push against this, I've got, terrible motivation after lunch on a Wednesday, right? And I just need to get better and I need to push through. No, instead, they're rearranging their calendar and they're doing something mind-numbingly boring at the time at which, or something that doesn't really matter or whatever, but they're doing something different at that time when their motivation is naturally ebbing. So they're sustaining higher overall because they're getting more done when the motivation is higher, and they're riding out without a level of guilt the times when the motivation is lower. They are never thinking of it as like a static thing that they can maintain.
Yeah. Now, I know there's been concepts like Dan Pink talks about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
Is that helpful to the discussion?
It kind of is. So let's just talk briefly about what those two things are. I already mentioned extrinsic motivation generally. So you can think of extrinsic motivation as being the external factors that can cause you to be motivated. So that tends to be things like pay, recognition, for example. So somebody saying, come up on stage and get this award, those particular types of things. Pay is probably the one that people think of most often. Intrinsic motivation is when the work itself is motivating you to continue. So you're like, this is something that is important to me in its own right. Mm-hmm. And a good proportion of intrinsic motivation comes from being connected to a higher purpose. So it's like, yes, I benefit from it in this way, but it's making the world better in a particular way, shape, or form, right? Mm-hmm. That's why you and I are motivated to do this podcast, right? Because we hope that there are people out there listening that can benefit from it, right? So we're being intrinsically motivated by that concept. A little bit complicated because, right, you think about if you're connecting it to a higher purpose, that sounds extrinsic, but it is. But that's sort of, it's like, what's your why? What's the reason why you're doing this thing? So, when you ask, is it helpful to the conversation? It sort of is, right? There are some things that we know about these two things. In the past, we thought, okay, almost like extrinsic motivation bad, intrinsic motivation good. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more complicated than that because almost all of us have extrinsic factors and intrinsic factors that govern what we do. Otherwise, we'd all work for free and struggle to eat. So we tend to have both of them at play at any one time. And how down on our luck we are might lead us to be more extrinsically motivated for a period of time, or the nature of the work we do might lead us to be more intrinsically motivated for a period of time. Mm. So the important thing is to recognize that both of those things exist, recognize that without judgment, and then use the various extrinsic and intrinsic motivators that are helpful for you. The one thing I will say, though, about extrinsic motivation that people really do need to watch out for is if you tend to err on the side of extrinsic motivation, that can be really problematic because you're thinking, if I do X, if I do Y, and if I do Z, then having done those things, then I'll get a promotion or a pay rise or something along those lines. Well, guess what? Sometimes that promotion doesn't come. Sometimes that pay rise doesn't come, right? And so you need to really avoid the idea of like now having a motivation crash, which happens as a result of you not getting those things, and therefore, of course, reduces the chance that you'll get them in the future. So having cultivating that intrinsic motivation over time is going to lead you to better results. Mm-hmm.
All right, so what's one simple thing someone can do this week?
Well, we talked about that idea of a first step, and I think that that's something that people really need to sort of take more seriously. So look at the work that you do. Look at any aspect of the work that you do today. Start by interrogating, if you like, the reasons why you get something from it, right? And so that could be that, by doing X or Y, the result is that a customer's life is better, for example, but something that is kind of like external and a bigger thing that benefits from what you do. Literally everybody can do that. We've never found a case where it's not possible to make that connection. Mm-hmm. But then once you've done that, then start thinking about how you could do it just a tiny bit better, and what would be even if it's 1% better, and then what would be your first step to accomplish that, even if it's like a 5-minute step or a 10-minute step, and do it. Do that first step. And then that will start to get you more motivated about the work that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Excellent. All right. Motivation fixed.
We fixed another one, Matt.
All right. We'll be back next week. Thanks, Paul.
Okay. We'll see you next week with another one. See ya.